Little preface. Basically, Doc Voodoo is my tribute to old-time pulp heroes like The Shadow or The Spider, Secret Agent X9, stuff like that. I got it in my head that I wanted to create my own pulp hero, but he had to be different somehow. So I said, what if he was a black voodoo-powered crime fighter in Prohibition-era Harlem? What was that?
Why not?
Why not? That's what I always say. So anyway, Aces and Eights was the first book about Doc Voodoo, and I've got a new one on the way, just like was just said, and I'll give you a little setup to what's going on here. When Doc is possessed by the voodoo spirits, the Lola, his patron saint, his patron power is Ogu. So you'll hear some dialogue between him and Ogu in here. Ogu is basically riding around on his back invisibly. He's horsed. That's what they call it when you're possessed in voodoo. And what happens in this book is that a good friend of Doc's, in his everyday guise as a physician and doctor when he's not fighting crime, a good friend of his, the Reverend Barnabas Farnes, has become possessed by an evil voodoo spirit, and Doc is trying to figure out how to get him unpossessed. And the young lady that will come in the middle of this scene is Doc's sort of erstwhile girlfriend, Fraylene, who does not know that he goes out at night possessed by a voodoo spirit to fight crime. So anyway, without further ado, this is Doc going into the Reverend's house because he sensed something evil and rather unusual in there. The house didn't carry the same charge as the church, even being the home of a holy man. Doc Voodoo felt a reticence in the walls and foundations to accept him, a weak but insistent force like a strong wind blowing in his face as he marched into it, but it didn't stop him from opening the door and stepping inside. That's when he felt the full force of that malignancy emanating from the basement, a soul full of poison and rot, rife with nightmare impulses. He closed the door behind him and moved through the foyer toward the hastily barricaded door to the basement, beneath the main staircase. The evil that he sensed down there, waiting in the dark, delighting in its own twisted fantasies of terror and fear, put him on guard. He wanted to draw his guns, but he knew he could not. Would have felt safer if he loosed the machete de Ogu, but dared not. He couldn't spill the host's blood, after all. It was the Reverend Barnabas Farnes, Fraylene's own upright and kindly uncle, possessed by something terrible and unknown. How was that even possible? Who is that? The thing in the basement asked itself. It sensed him now. Who is that tromping through my front door? Ogu? Doc asked. I told you not to come here, Ogu said. Doc heard quick, heavy footsteps thumping up the basement stairs. Then the basement door buckled in its frame. I know you're out there, the thing in the basement croaked, throwing all its weight on the door again and again. The sideboard blocking the door scooted an inch. I know you're out there, and I know you ain't like the rest. I can smell that red iron sumbitch riding you, friend. Doc whispered to himself. Who is he, Ogu? Ogu was silent for a time. He ain't one of mine, he said. I got no jurisdiction on this one. Well, Lakewood? Erzuli? Them neither, Ogu answered. Somebody else is running this one, and it ain't anybody we hold favor with. Let me out, the thing in the basement shouted, its basement still hammering against the locked and barricaded door. It's been a coon's age since I've been loose. Time's a-wasting, friend, and I ain't aiming to waste it. The Dread Baron marched forward, planted one boot on the sideboard, and shoved it back against the buckling door. Not on my watch, you son of a bitch. There was a pause. The thing stood just on the other side of that locked door, and the Baron almost fancied he could hear its infernal mental wheels turning, smell the smoke rising from the stripped and rusted clockwork of its diseased mind. Who are you? The thing asked. What do you care what mess I make of these mundanes? Ogu, tell me something. Nothing I can tell you, Ogu answered. It ain't Rada, and it ain't Petrol. Maybe Gede, but that's just a guess. Gede, the dead, the ancestors, and the infernals. If that was the way of things, Ogu was right. Neither he nor Legba nor Erzuli could help Doc with a Gede run amok. Doc himself would have to figure out which Gede Baron held sway over this troublesome spirit, then try to get it recalled. And getting a Gede Baron to call back a spirit already loose, probably by someone's command, meant Doc would have to do that Baron some favor as well, or give him something in return. Not a proposition he relished. The door suddenly shuddered on its hinges as the thing in the basement threw its host body against it. "Awfully quiet out there, Buck. What you thinking about got you so quiet all of a sudden?" Doc had a sudden inspiration. He grasped one end of the blood-red scarf that hung around his throat, the serpent d'Ohu, and yanked it loose. The scarf coiled and undulated in his hands like a silk snake, restless and alive. "Oh, somebody's making plans," the thing whispered. "What you thinking about, Buck?" Doc raised the serpentine scarf to his face, cradling it in both hands. He spoke to it. "Hold him," he said. The scarf quivered in his hands, affirming his mandate. Then Doc pivoted sideward, laid one boot on the sideboard again, and shoved. His superhuman strength sent the big, bulky buffet scooting lengthwise down the hallway. The basement door was free and clear. The thing in the basement threw all its weight on the door, and it burst on its hinges, the door bolt tearing right through the old wood of the jamb and littering the hallway with splinters. There before Doc Voodoo stood the Reverend Barnabas Farnes, hands grasping and eager, dark eyes bulging, lunatic wild, and teeth gnashed in a feral snarl. Doc couldn't believe his eyes. Here was the same man he knew from countless hours spent in the parlor, his study, his church. It was the same Reverend Barnabas Farnes in shape but not in aspect. It was the holy man's hellish twin, a diabolical doppelganger, nasty enough and determined enough to tear a man limb from limb with his bare hands and his snarling teeth. The demon in the guise of the Reverend studied Doc and sneered. "What you dressed for, Buck?" Doc threw the scarf, and the great length of crimson cloth came to life as it flew, its light silky material acquiring an inexplicable weight and heft. The demon tried to snatch the slithering scarf from the air, but it fell on him like a striking snake and coiled around his arms, his torso, his upper legs. He stumbled forward and tried to struggle as the scarf constricted. Then he lost his balance and pitched forward, landing hard on his face, writhing in the grip of the fiery red rag. "Oh, the hell you say," he spat and hissed. "This rag can't hold me." "It can, and it will," Doc said, kneeling beside him and yanking the writhing demon over on its back. The thing in the Reverend spat up at him. "You and your frack wig and your skull face. You don't scare me, Buck. Nothing scares me now that I got me some real estate on this plane." "You're just a squatter," Doc snarled. "Who called you?" "Ain't telling you nothing," the demon spat. Doc snatched a handful of the scarf and hefted the Reverend off the floor. He held him high in one hand as though he were only a child and shook him hard. "Who called you?" "Jesus, Mary, Joseph, and Herod," the demon sang. "Or maybe Mammy Laveau." "Wrong answer," Doc growled and slammed the bound Reverend against the wall. The demon-haunted feet kicked and bucked against the wall, seeking solid ground and finding none. He didn't want to damage the Reverend, but intimidation was in order to get the demon talking, to learn its name. Only with its name could he hope to have power over it. "You got nothing on me," the demon hissed. "I'm here and I ain't leaving, so you might as well let me go." Doc was just about to tell him that wasn't going to happen when the front door lock tripped, and the door swung wide, and someone stepped in from the rainy night. Reflex ruled. The Baron's one free hand dove into his coat, snatched one of his pistols from its holster, and leveled the weapon at the open door and the figure framed there. It was Fraeline Farnes. He didn't know if the fear in her eyes came from staring down the barrel of his gun or seeing him, the cemetery man himself, standing in her own foyer holding her demon-possessed uncle aloft like a lunatic in a straitjacket. Her eyes bulged in her rain-soaked face like two white stones, and her mouth fell open, seeking a scream and not finding it. Something fell from her hands and thumped as it hit the welcome mat beneath her. Doc studied what she'd dropped. It was a black doctor's bag. Dub Corvo's doctoring bag. His bag. "Where did you get that?" he snarled, feeling a fury rise in him that he hadn't summoned or expected. She found her scream and let it loose. It filled the foyer, the house, the street outside. The demon in his grasp laughed like a loon, trembled like a giggle-addled child. Doc moved fast. He dropped the demon, made the doorway in 3 long strides, yanked Fraylene inside, and slammed the door behind her. She tried to break and run, but he took her by one thin wrist and drew her right back into his embrace. One arm locked her, and a gloved hand fell upon her open, screaming mouth. The other planted the muzzle of his weapon against her forehead. "Oh dear," Ogu muttered. Doc didn't listen. He had to quiet her. If he could do so faster with fear than reason, so be it. He thumbed back the hammer of the pistol and growled into her ear. "Quiet," he said. Her gagged scream became a fearful whine. "Well, that girl's got a mouth on her," the demon said from where it lay on the floor, still held fast by the crimson scarf. "You too," Doc snarled, then spoke again to Fraylene, his voice softer now. "I ain't here to hurt you or your uncle over there. I'm here to help. I need you to keep your mouth shut and listen to me, sane and sensible like. You think you can do that?" She nodded, but he could feel her shuddering against him, her body trembling in the throes of fight or flight, heart hammering inside her like a pile driver. He counted to 5, saying nothing while he did so. Finally, he spoke to her again. "I'm going to let you go. I want you to go over there to the foot of the stairs. Sit down if you have to. We're going to have us a little palaver. You up for that?" She nodded. The Dread Baron took his hand off her mouth and gently thrust her away from him. Fraylene spun to face him. He held up the pistol, let her watch as he slowly lowered the hammer. Then he stowed it in the shoulder holster once again. He showed her his empty hands. She backed into the stairs and nearly fell onto them. She caught herself on the banister, though, and gently lowered herself down, sitting as he commanded. She couldn't take her big brown eyes off of him. He tried to read her. He saw fear, wonder, disbelief, even disgust. But she seemed more in control of herself now. Her initial shock passed. First things first, he glanced down at the doctor's bag and nudged it with the toe of one gravedigger's boot. "Where'd you get this?" "The doctor's," Fraylene said, catching in her throat. "Dr. Corvo's." "He gave you this?" he asked. She shook her head, looking a little ashamed. "He wasn't there. I picked the lock with a hairpin and let myself in. I found that and I took it." Picked the lock? He had no idea she was so endowed. He resisted the urge to smile a little. "And what did you plan to do with it?" "There's morphine in there and a needle." She nodded toward the bound reverend on the floor. "I was going to try and sedate him." "Sedate me?" the demon said. "Girl, all you do is get my blood up, not to mention my—" "Quiet!" Doc roared. Fraylene jumped, even though he was speaking to the demon. He turned to her again. "You know how to give a shot like that? How much of that dope is safe to give?" She shook her head, eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. Dr. Dub wasn't home. I needed him. I needed his help, and he wasn't there. I had to do something." "There are other doctors," the Baron suggested. "Nobody can see him like this," she wailed, suggesting her trussed-up uncle, tears pouring forth. "He's a good man, a kind man. This isn't him." "Oh, this is me," the demon sang. Doc leveled a finger at him. "If I have to tell you again." "You'll what?" the demon challenged. "Hurt me, Buck? Kill me? You ain't gonna do shit so long as you give a good goddamn how the good reverend comes out at the back end. Don't you threaten me." Fraylene was up off the stairs, backing into the little dining room to the right of the foyer, eager to be away from her uncle. Doc took a step toward her. "Don't run," he said. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. "Nothing," the demon said. "I'm right as rain, little miss." "He's got something inside him," Doc said. "Something not human." Fraylene started, trying to make sense of his words. He narrowed his eyes. "You're a church-going woman. I shouldn't have to spell this out for you." She shook her head, mouth working but no words readily available. I can't. How could that be?" "Look at him," the Baron said. "Hell, miss, look at me. What do you think you're in the middle of here?" "Even so," she said. "Why him? Why now?" "I haven't got any answers," the Baron said, "but I can find them. We've just got to keep him under wraps a bit." "Wrapped up good and tight," the demon said, straining against the serpente. Fraylene shook her head. It was too much for her to take all at once. She stared at Doc, trying to make sense of the Halloween sight of him. "Who are you? How do you even get in here?" "I'm a friend," Doc said. She clung to the wall, staring at him, stealing glances at her round uncle, trying to reason out what she'd stumbled into. Finally, he thought he saw the fear and confusion subsiding in her. "What can I do?" she asked. It wasn't a plea or a lament. It was just a simple question in search of a direct answer. He gently kicked the doctor's bag over to her. It scooted to a halt at her feet. "Go on and pull the morphine and hypo out of there. You're going to give him a shot." "You ain't giving me nothing," the demon snarled, struggling again but making no headway. "That won't do a goddamn thing to me." The Dread Baron leveled his burning gaze at the bound man. "Then what are you so worried about?" The demon didn't have an answer for that.